Hello, my name is Vale rie Demers. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Laval University in the province of Quebec, Canada. And in collaboration with my supervisor, Ivan Leanza, and Maya Yampolsky from the same university, it's my pleasure to present our symposium, Entering the Profession, Our Future Helping Professionals Prepare to Work with Diversity, which obviously tackles a topic related to intercultural training. Okay, in this presentation, I will say a few words about the scientific and social context in which our work takes place. I will state the aims of this symposium, and I will offer an overview of entering the profession in a context of diversity, a mixed method longitudinal study from which our data mainly come from. Then I will present quickly my colleagues who will do individual oral presentations. Okay, for the context, Canada is, as other countries, increasingly diversified because notably of the influx of migrants and helping professionals are more likely to encounter clients from different ethnocultural backgrounds, which can make their relationships more difficult because, for example, of differences in language or differences in their representations of the treatment. Also, people from ethnocultural minority groups are more vulnerable to health and mental health problems. So it's not only a practical, but also an ethical imperative to give them the interventions they need, and these interventions must be culturally competent. Fortunately, the intercultural training is known to be effective, and in Canada, it's required at the university level and helping professions. But some studies say that professionals find their training insufficient and are not, and feel they're not well prepared to work with diversity. Also, there are studies, but rarely Canadian ones, on how students and professionals experience their working with clients from different ethnocultural backgrounds. But there's less information about how they experience working with clients. They find different because of other characteristics like their sexual orientation, their functional limitation, their religion, etc. Also, mainly the studies we have are cross-sectional, so they're done at one point in time. So, the aims of this symposium is to provide you with a snapshot view of the intercultural training which is offered in helping profession programs at the university level in Quebec, Canada. Also, it's to present results from entering the profession in a context of diversity, longitudinal study with participants who came from Quebec, France, and Switzerland, and are helping profession students, so students from psychology, occupational therapy, social work, and midwifery. Okay, for entering the profession, the principal aim of this study was to understand the forms of relationship students establish with the other, or the people they see as other because of ethnocultural or other characteristic. And so this study took place throughout their last internship. So, and the year of their last internship, so just before they became more autonomous practitioners. Okay, for the method, in fact, entering the profession was done in three main data collection points. The first is at the start of their internship, the second at mid-internship, and the last at the end of their internship. At the first and third point, we did quantitative data collection with questionnaires. So the students asked to fill out questionnaires about their acculturation orientation, so the HCAS, and their cultural competence with the multicultural personality questionnaire, and also a questionnaire of adult attachment. It's the same, as I said, it's the same, they had to fill the same questionnaires at the third data point. For the qualitative data, it's split in 3 points. So there was a first interview took place at the start of the internship. So students must talk of their experiences with others and the consequences of these experiences. At mid-internship, it's a little difference. They did a practice narrative interview. So they talk about significant experiences they had with ethnocultural or other forms of diversity. The consequence of these experiences were also explored. At the third data collection point, the students had to take part in the last interview, which was pretty similar to the first interview. So it explored their experiences with others, their consequences, but also they had to reflect on the changes these experiences has brought to them throughout their internship. Okay, so it's time to introduce my colleagues who have kindly accepted to do presentation in the symposium. First, we have Andréane Baudouin-Julien, who will provide you with a global picture of the intercultural training in the province of Quebec, which is offered to helping profession students in university. Then we have Gabrielle Bernard, who will talk about the quantitative results from the first data collection point of entering the professions for participants from social work and occupational therapy programs in France, Quebec, and Switzerland. More specifically, it will talk about a cluster analysis that were done to explore the association between the cultural competence and the acculturation orientation and the attachment, the adult attachment. Third, but not least, we have Yvonne Anza, who will talk about data from the same collection point, more specifically on qualitative analysis, focusing on intercultural experiences of helping profession students from Quebec, Canada, before they start their internship, the consequences of these experiences, and also the non-ethnocultural characteristic that bothers them. Unfortunately, I was supposed, as you can see on the program, to present results from the second data point, but it was impossible because of non-COVID related health issues. But I hope you appreciate my colleague's presentation, and we are all looking forward to discuss with you and chat with you during the Congress. Thanks a lot.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation named Developing Awareness of Diversity, Training about Intercultural Issues in University Caring Professions Programs in Quebec. My name is Andréane Baudouin-Julien. I'm a doctoral student in psychology in Laval University in Quebec. This study was made with Ivan Leanza, the director of the Psychology and Culture Laboratory at the School of Psychology in Université Laval, and also with Vale rie Demers, postdoctoral fellow at the Psychology and Culture Lab. So for those of you who don't really know, Quebec is a French-speaking province in Canada. We have a population of 8.4 million people. And as other places in the world, there has been an increase in immigration due to globalization. And there's been some political and social tensions concerning cultural diversity, especially because as we are a linguistic minority group in Canada, some people fear that if too many immigrants come, we might lose our language and culture. So, for example, debates on how much immigration request we should accept are present in the political debates. And also, Quebec has a complicated relationship with its First Nations, so the people that were there before the French and English colonization. So there has been unfair and harmful acts and laws throughout history. And even if the government officials today, they attempt to repair the harm caused, there is still traces of mistreatment in the First Nation communities. And notably, a shocking event took place last September 2020. So Joyce Echaquan, an Atikamekw First Nation woman, was dead in a Quebec hospital due to abuse and neglect from healthcare practitioners. So the investigation regarding this event is now ongoing. So it's in this social and political context regarding cultural diversity that we wondered how are the future professionals trained to meet the cultural diversity in our society. So what kind of intercultural training is offered to the practitioner in the caring professions? So this study is an overview that describes and compares the courses available in 4 disciplines of the caring profession. So we have occupational therapy, social work, psychology, and midwifery. So we look at the presence of such courses in each discipline, their pedagogical characteristics, and their content. So for the method, we did review the intercultural courses offered for each programs on the university's official websites. So to be considered an intercultural course, it had to be on intercultural intervention or on topics related to cultural diversity. So for example, immigration, identity, intergroup dynamics. And after we had all this information from the website, we contacted the head of programs for each discipline to confirm that the information that we had is valid and to obtain additional information if needed. After we had all this information, we entered it in the QDA Miner software for a qualitative and thematic analysis. So this is an exploratory study. So it was an inductive process. So we coded the themes of the course's syllabus, and they were after grouped according to the dimensions of the cross-cultural counseling competencies model that we will present further in the presentation. So what we were looking for exactly in the websites was which courses were offered and in which program. So was it psychology, social work, occupational therapy, or midwifery? Is it a graduate or undergraduate program course? Is it a mandatory course or is it an optional course? Also for the pedagogical characteristics, is it on a specific cultural group or is the course about intercultural intervention and cultures in general? The teaching method, so whether it's a lecture, internship, or a combination of a couple of lecture before an internship. The type of content, so is it more theoretical and clinical content? And inside the course's syllabi, so exactly what the course is about, what subjects are addressed. So for the results, we had 46 programs in 11 universities. So the programs leading to a professional title were considered. So in Quebec, for occupational therapy, you need a master's degree. Social work, you need a bachelor or a master's degree. Psychology, you need a doctoral degree. And midwifery, there's only one program in Quebec, and it's a bachelor's degree. So we can see that there was 11 programs, so 24% total, that did not offer any specific cultural course. It's especially in psychology, in the graduate programs, and occupational therapy, the undergraduate programs. So in total, we have found that there's 51 intercultural courses that are offered, and the majority of those courses are optional, so 35 on 51. There's 16 courses that are mandatory, and in proportion, psychology and social work, they have more optional courses than occupational therapy and midwifery, where intercultural training tend to be more mandatory. Regarding the teaching method, the lecture is almost the only teaching method in psychology and social work, whereas occupational therapy and midwifery programs, there is 6 courses that either combine lecture with the internship or are more experiential learning activities as our internships. For the cultural group, most of the courses tend to consider culture in a general matter. There were 6 courses on specific cultural groups, 2 courses on specific locations and cultures where the international internships were taking place, and 4 courses on First Nations. So interestingly, it was all social work courses that were about specifically the First Nations, and it was all lectures teaching method. For the type of content, we can see that the theoretical content is more prominent. So theoretical content, for example, on culture, on immigration, stereotypes, racism, this is the type of content that is the more taught, especially in psychology and social work. Occupational therapy and midwifery, they tend to have more clinically oriented content presented in the courses. So the thematic analysis, we coded the content of the courses syllabi into themes. They were then grouped in 3 categories according to the cross-cultural counseling competencies model developed by Daryl Wingsu. This model has 3 dimensions. So the first one is the self-awareness. So it's the counselor's awareness of their own assumption, values, and bias. So for example, to have an awareness and a knowledge about their own racial and cultural heritage and how it personally and professionally affects their definition and bias of normality or abnormality, and in how it interacts with the process of counseling. So it comprises things like cultural self-awareness and self-examination. The second dimension is cultural knowledge. So it's understanding the worldview of the culturally different client. So it's information about the particular group they are working with. So for example, the historical or cultural background of certain groups. And it's also an understanding of how race, culture, and ethnicity may affect, for example, personality formation, vocational choices, manifestation of psychological disorders, help-seeking behaviors. And it's also knowledge about socio-political influence that affect the life of the racial and ethnic minorities. So themes like immigration issues and discrimination are related to this dimension. The third one is intervention skills. So it's to develop appropriate interventions, strategies, and technique that, for example, respect the spiritual beliefs, also an understanding of institutional barriers that can impact the therapeutical relationship. So, for example, themes like culturally sensitive assessment instruments or a specific intervention approach. So we will present an overview of those 3 dimensions according to the 4 disciplines. So the frequency analysis revealed that globally the dimension of cultural knowledge, so the understanding of the worldview of the culturally different client, is the most prominent dimension. Especially the themes of immigration politics, acculturation process, discrimination, and racism were really prominent. Self-awareness is an important dimension in psychology. And again, occupational therapy and midwifery are more clinically oriented, as the proportion of content concerning intervention skills is greater than in the other type of programs. So in conclusion, this study is an overview that comprises strengths and limitations. So we had a confirmation rate of almost 100% with the program heads. So they confirmed the information. So we know that what we have as data is a valid information. This is an overview of the 2019-2020 year. So it's limited, of course, the information that we have is limited to this year, and we know that it can change with the leave of the teacher or certain administration decisions. So the information that we have is limited in time. And also, this is an exploratory study, so further study is necessary, for example, to measure the impact of those intercultural training on the cultural competency of the professionals. And also, observational studies would be interesting to understand the learning environment and the relationship between the teachers and the students in the class, which can have an impact on the efficacy of the course and on cultural competency. So what we noticed in this study is that the availability of the intercultural course is inconsistent. So we saw that some programs do not offer at all intercultural training for their future professionals. There's also differences between the disciplines. So in general, psychology and social work, the courses tend to be optional. They tend to be lectures that address theoretical content and intercultural training in occupational therapy and midwifery tend to be more mandatory course, and it tend to be more clinically oriented in the teaching method and also in the type of content that is presented in the course. We also see that there is an overrepresentation of the cultural knowledge dimension, and we think that all three dimensions of this model are important. So we would benefit as a society to teach also more the self-awareness and the intervention skills to maximize the cultural competency of the professionals in the caring professions. We think also that we might gain to rethink the courses to include more experiential teaching methods, as it is proven to be more beneficial to increase cultural competency than theoretical content presented in a lecture. We would like to leave you with a question that arose during the team meetings concerning the mandatory or optional nature of intercultural training. So we did not encounter literature on the subjects, and we were wondering if it would be better to impose mandatory intercultural training to all the caring profession students, or if there is benefits of offering an optional training. So we would suspect that more intrinsically motivated students would then take the course, and that would maybe have an impact on the classroom environment or on the efficacy of the training to improve the cultural competency. So thank you all for your attention, and we look forward to talking with you in July.
Hi, I'm Gabriel Bernard, and I'm studying for a master's degree in psychology at Université Laval. I'm going to briefly resume my work as a trainee in the Laboratoire of Psychology and Culture. As part of the bigger project Entering the Profession, my work was centered on cluster analysis of cultural competencies and its association with acculturation, orientation, and attachment. So first, other than me, 13 researchers took part in the whole project, and I would like to thank them all. So first, I'm going to walk through the research questions, concept, and objectives of the study. And second, I will talk about the methods before looking at the results of the three cases, which are Quebec, Canada, France, and Switzerland. I will then share our interpretation of the result before closing the presentation. So first, the bigger picture here is the research project called Entering the Profession, Our Future Helping Professionals Prepare to Work with Diversity. It's acknowledged that some professionals experience difficulties intervening with people from different culture than theirs, and that cultural competencies must be taught to future professionals in order to reduce physical and mental health inequalities. The aim of this whole project is to provide knowledge about the cultural training and experience of future helping professionals, but also about their representation of the other. So as part of the project, this study aims was to explore if health and social work professionals are equally prepared to work in intercultural context, and the three cases allowed us to verify if those future professionals are distributed the same way from one country to another. To achieve that, we assessed the intercultural competencies with the Multicultural Personality Questionnaire, or MPQ, and the representation of the others, which was a combination of the result of the Host Community Acculturation Scale, or HCS, and the Adult Attachment Scale, or AAS. So first, participants of our study answered the MPQ, which is composed of 43 questions measuring 5 different scales, which are open-mindedness, social initiative, cultural empathy, emotional stability, and flexibility. Throughout studies, this tool has been used to assess intercultural adjustment in various contexts, like international students or expatriates adaptation. It's also had been used to measure intercultural competencies, and in our study, this was the case. For the HCAS, the HCAS is a 24-item tool to assess the attitude towards migrants, and it's split in 4 different subjects, which are the culture, customs, values, and marriage with migrants. It's split in 6 acculturation and orientation, 3 of which are welcoming and 3 are rejecting. The welcoming ones are integrationism, transformation, and individualism. The 3 rejecting ones are the segregationism, assimilationism, and exclusionism. So the endorsement of the 3 rejecting ones show reject of the migrants. So we used the HCS as part of our conceptualization of the representation of the other. The AS was conceptualized as the second half of the representation of the others, as it intervenes in how people create relationship and act towards others. It's also been shown that a secure attachment style offers personal resources that are needed for a sensible and adequate intervention. The questionnaire itself is composed of 18 items measuring either the depend, anxiety, or close scale. And the score on each of the 3 scales can show to some extent the attachment style of participants. So, for example, someone with higher score on the depend and close scales has a more secure attachment style than someone with higher score on the anxiety and lower scores on the 2 other scales. So the recruitment of future professionals took part in universities and or specialized training institutes just before participants entered their profession. We recruited occupational therapy and social work trainees, and the study took place in 3 different regions. The first one was Quebec, Canada, French-speaking province of Canada, France, and in Switzerland, also in 2 different French-speaking regions, which are Lausanne and Fribourg. So first, participants of each case have been clusterized based on their result on the NPQ questionnaires, and we used complete linkage method and solution with 2 to 6 clusters have been explored. In every case, the solution with 3 and 4 clusters seem to offer enough data to do further analysis, and we did so on those 2 solutions. And in every case, the solution with 4 clusters offered more details, as one of its cluster was consistently absorbed in one of the cluster of the 3 cluster solution. So we then chose to continue further analysis with the 4 cluster solution in every of the 3 cases. We then did a factor analysis on the HCAS results since it had issues with reliability. And the factor analysis showed that marriage-related items highly saturated together and formed a distinct factor, so we chose to remove those items for the filter analysis. Then the alpha analysis showed that HCAS scores were more reliable without those items. We then conducted some ANOVAs using the cluster as independent variables and result on the NPQ, HCAS, and AS as dependent variables. When the postulate of homogeneity and variance was not respected, instead of ANOVAs, we did Brown-Forsyth test. And when it was also the case, we used Games-Howell post-hoc test, and when the postulate was respected, we used ANOVAs and Tsuki test. For the participants, it has been seen that it's mostly women, and their age average on 25 years old for the Quebec case, around 23 years old for the France and Switzerland cases. And most of Quebec's case participants had intercultural training, but almost none had in the France case and few in the Switzerland case. For the cluster, we've found that consistent result in the 4 cases. The cluster analysis resulted in 4 similar clusters in every case. The four clusters have been compared within each other with z-scores. So higher score here doesn't mean absolute high score, and lower score here doesn't mean absolute low score. So the first cluster was labeled considerate, since it had higher cultural empathy and open-mindedness results. The second one was called adaptive, since it had higher result on the flexibility, emotional stability, and social initiative scales. The third cluster was called reticent, because it had lower result on cultural empathy and open-mindedness scores on scales. And the last cluster was labeled maladapted, since it had lower result on the emotional stability and social initiative results. For the first case, it's the considerate cluster had a significantly lower result on the assimilationism scale than the maladapted cluster. Therefore, participants categorized in the maladapted cluster are more rejecting towards migrants than the considerate cluster. No other significant difference were observed on the HCES results. On the EAS, the adaptive cluster had significantly higher result on the depend scale than the maladapted clusters, which had higher result than the three other cluster on the anxiety scale. And again, the maladapted cluster showed difference with the other participants. Its results show that it has the least secure attachment style of the four clusters. In the second case, the only significant difference on the HCES is on the exclusionism scale. The reticent and adaptive cluster have higher score on it than the considerate cluster. They are more rejecting toward migrants. When compared to the other cases, it's also interesting to notice that overall scores on the exclusionism scale of French cluster are higher than the Quebec and Switzerland's case. On the EAS, significant difference can be noticed between maladapted and considerate cluster on the depend scale. The former one has lower scores. Just like in Quebec's case, the maladapted cluster has higher score than the three other clusters on the anxiety scale. It also has lower close score than the three other clusters. We also notice that the adaptive cluster has higher scores on the close scale than the reticent cluster. Therefore, the maladapted cluster is the least secure of the club on the attachment scale. On the third case, no significant difference was observed on the HCS result, and on the EAS we can see that again the maladaptive cluster is more anxious than the adaptive cluster. So we also observe the same pattern than in the other cases, better score on the MPQ for the considerate and adaptive cluster tend to lead to more secure patterns on the AAS. So to summarize, maladapted cluster have a less secure attachment style. In two cases, participants in these clusters tend to endorse more the assimilationism and the exclusionism acculturation orientations. So they might be more rejecting towards migrants. Therefore, students that are less emotionally stable and that takes initiative tend to have a dependent attachment style. Reticent cluster have a lower score on anxiety than the maladapted one in Quebec and France, but still show pattern of unsecure attachment. The French case of reticent cluster has higher assimilationism, they are more rejecting for migrants than the other cluster. The adaptive cluster have higher scores on the close and depend than the other cluster, while having lower score on the anxiety one. They show pattern of secure attachment style. Interestingly, French adaptive cluster has higher score on the exclusionism scale than the other cluster, but France has higher overall exclusionism score, so that might explain. Considerate cluster in France and Quebec case have lower scores on the anxiety scale. French considerate cluster also have higher score on the depend and close scales. Considerate cluster are the one with significantly lower score on the assimilationism and or exclusionism scale. So overall, results show that assimilationism and exclusionism are widely rejected by students in our samples, but French endorsement of exclusionism is higher than the two other samples. So the overall link between acculturation orientation and clusters profile is weak, but it appears to have a good connection between the four clusters profiles found on the MPQ result and the attachment style. Some of our results would require further analysis or reflection. That would be the case of the endorsement of exclusionism in France adaptive cluster. But on that subject, Charlie Hebdo's and Bataclan's attack combined with massive immigrants' arrival in the recent years might have altered the socio-political context in France and therefore might have a role in play in the higher endorsement of exclusionism. So as significant difference can be observed between participants that have been clusterized regarding their MPQ result on the HCS and AAS questionnaires, it's concluded that future professionals are not equal in intercultural competencies and skills before entering the profession. They do differ in terms of intercultural competencies and skills. Therefore, some students are more prepared than others to be in intercultural settings and to intervene in such contexts. There's consistently two clusters with lower MPQ score that are less secure on the attachment style and shows patterns of less secure attachment style that are more rejecting toward migrants. Therefore, there are future professionals that have a lower intercultural competencies than the other, and some also differ in regards of their representation of the other. Some are more rejecting towards others, while some have a general attachment style more or less secure. It turns out that future professionals of various French-speaking regions can be divided into similar groups, and most of them would benefit from a training on the MPQ, as previous researches showed that it can improve intercultural competencies, while maladapted and retention clusters could benefit even more from that kind of training. So here are the sources used in the presentation. And finally, I would like to thank you all for your attention and interest, and I wish you a good convention. I look forward to discuss with you in July. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Yvan Lianza, and I'm professor of psychology at Université Laval in Quebec City. I will present you disturbing differences helping profession students encounters with people they see as other. This is part of a larger project called Entering the Profession, and it's done with a lot of people, as you can see here, colleagues from Quebec City, from France, from Switzerland, and of course, scientific collaborators and students. My talk will be very classical, a few words about the context, the method and result, and the discussion. The context. As you know, culture is often seen as a barrier to intervention, but intercultural training is a requirement from professional organization. It's also known as being very effective, but intercultural training has a positive effect, but it's usually done at the very least of the courses, especially in psychology, at the end of the courses, and most of the professors, teachers are at unease in teaching intercultural issues. Also, there are very few studies in Canada, and most of the studies are done in counseling, not in other helping professions. And there is a lack of longitudinal measures. So we tried to answer these unanswered questions, and our research question for this particular talk is: what are experiences of relationship to the other for helping profession students before entering the profession? So we wanted to know what kind of experience they already had before going into the profession as full professional. Well, it's not full professional, they are still students, but this is the last internship, the integration internship, before they are considered full professionals. So it's a longitudinal mixed method study. The data I will present to you is about the entry interview we did with them. It was about few topics, but I will focus on significant intercultural experiences and other experiences they might find disturbing. Interviews were transcribed verbatim, they were inductively and thematically analyzed, coded, there was an interjudge agreement, and we did some frequencies and co-occurrences or proximity analysis on these codes. Participants, they were 32, mainly female, mainly in their 20s, and mainly from psychology and social work, but we included also midwife and occupational therapy students in the study. So first batch of results, it's the other differences than the culture which they find difficult to deal with. As you can see, the first category is called unusual behaviors, and it englobes a lot of different kind of behaviors, like poor hygiene, lack of manners, no respect for animals, or close-minded people. All these are behaviors not attributed to a particular group, a particular social category, but just behaviors, individual behaviors. Then we have like categories, like social categories. And the first one is around gender issues, and particularly women's status. Male and female inequalities was something very often mentioned, and sexual orientation, or women and religions, like women's status inside religion. But religion is the third of this theme that is mentioned, especially because they do say that they do not understand how people can follow such rigid rules, or they see religion as a danger for integrity. Fourth category are social classes or privileges, and so poverty, extreme poverty can be something very disturbing, or extreme richness can be something disturbing too. And in the middle class is seen as a problem when middle class people are not aware of their privileges. Then we have a lot of other categories like violence, criminality. Criminality you include using drugs or prostitution. Age, being with children or old people can be a problem for certain participants. Being in front of someone who has very rigid or extreme political stance can also be a problem. Physical differences like obesity or disabilities are also disturbing. And I have to mention that all of our participants at sometimes in the interview said there are differences that don't bother them and that they are very open person. Here you can see the frequencies as they were already in the order of frequencies, but most of them, as you can see, are unusual behaviors, women's status, religion, and social class and privileges. So what can we say about these other differences that disturb them? Well, there are a lot, but there was one missing, and the one who's missing is very strange for the Quebec context, because as you may know, in Quebec we are francophone. Maybe you noticed it. We are francophone, but there is an anglophone minority, and the rest of Canada is mainly anglophone. So there is this tension between francophones and anglophones, but language was not mentioned one time. These differences were or considered as very rigid, very closed, or at the opposite, very lacking any clear boundary, like very fuzzy, like sexual orientation. It's something very fuzzy and very disturbing. Could be like that. And the third characteristic would be the intensity. As I said, an extreme political stance would be very disturbing for our participants. Or an extreme religious stance also would be very disturbing. So that were the characteristic of this difference. Closure, lack of clear boundaries, and intensity. as I said, we also asked them about their significant intercultural experience, and we found 4 types of these intercultural experiences. The first one, which is not one of the types, but it's the absence of any intercultural experiences. They may have traveled, they may have friends of another cultural group, but they don't find these experiences as significant. The first type is, we called it touristic because it contains travels or school trips. The second type is studies because it was inside their studies that they did some kind of internship. Sometimes it was abroad. The third type is personal experiences, like they were of mixed heritage, identity, or they had family, relative, friends of other cultural groups, or they were because they followed their parents in different cultural contexts, so they had experience, school experience mainly, in different cultural contexts. And the fourth type is the professional and commitment one. Some of them were involved in local association in multicultural neighborhood, or they had experience abroad with humanitarian organization. So as you can see here, there is kind of continuum in these experiences. At one end, we have experience of witnessing differences, and at the other end, being committed to change things, being involved in humanitarian organization. So it's kind of continuum. We see it as a kind of continuum in between witnessing and being involved in experiences. But all of these are significant intercultural experiences for our participants. We asked them about what the psychological consequences these experiences had for them. Well, the first one was awareness. They were more aware of their own culture, of intergroup relations, and of their own ability to adapt in very diverse settings. The second one was openness and prejudice. So they said that these experiences were opening their mind and help them nuance the stereotype they may have about other groups. But some had very bad experiences, very difficult experiences, and so it reinforced their stereotypes about the group they were in, as you can see in this quotation. It had effect on their professional expectation questioning. Most of them were found in these experiences argument to be more involved in their future profession. It confirmed the attractiveness of the profession, but some had also some kind of doubt, but it certainly helped them to enlarge their vision about the profession. Another level of consequences, psychological consequences, it's at the identity level, and it brought questioning about who they are, what kind of value they have. And when it was a difficult experience, it also had long-term traumatizing consequences. As you can see in the quotation here, these experiences make this participant more assertive in who he is. And last but not least, the last consequence they mention is that they change their behavior. They are more proactive in defending minority or particular groups, and even some said they had changed their own consumption behavior, going toward more sustainable consumption behaviors. Here again, we have a kind of continuum. You can see some change at the cognitive level. Most of them are at the cognitive level: awareness, openness, and prejudice, questioning about the profession. And some are more at the behavioral level, like the taking action consequences. Emotion, I put them in the middle because they have some kind of importance in here, but we don't know how to theorize them yet. As I said, we did proximity analysis between the type of experiences and the type of psychological consequences. And as you can see here, all type of experiences had awareness, openness, and nuancing prejudices as consequences. Two of them, studies and personal, had consequences at the identity level, and two of them, personal and professional and commitment, had the consequences at the behavioral level. Okay, if we wrap up about significant intercultural experiences, we can see that there are at least 4 types of significant experiences. There is a variety of consequences, but mainly cognitive, I would say. Behavioral change is more rare. Studies and professional experiences, which are the one we are most interested in because of the intercultural training, because we are training future helping professionals. So have positive consequences, but also negative consequences. And that reinforce the necessity to have proper supervision when we send our students, especially abroad, but not only. If we send them in internship in multicultural neighborhoods, for example, institutions, the intercultural dimension needs to be very vivid in the supervision. And that lead us to a question: how much commitment is needed to bring a change in behavior? As we have seen, it's mainly cognitive, at the cognitive level, that we have changes. Significant intercultural experiences bring mostly cognitive changes, but in the behavior, not very much. So how much commitment is needed in to have this kind of change that we want to train better helping professionals? Okay, as a broad discussion to close this talk, I would say that there are various disturbing differences and significant intercultural experiences, but there is very little that bring changes. And some of them are negative, and it brings changes, and it traumatizes the students if they are not adequately supervised. We can also say that what we obtain in the discourse of our participants reflects Quebec society today's reality. Gérard Bouchard, who's an anthropologist who discusses about intercultural issues in Quebec society, said that there are 4 tensions in Quebec society today. Constitutive tensions, he said, and it's issues between individualistic choice and collectivistic choice, which is very vivid. Religion is a very dense subject too. Class privileges is also another one. And gender issues, women's status, is also another one. And as you can see, we obtain the 4 of them in our participant discourses. So they are from Quebec, that's quite sure. What they bring in their discourse, let us think also that as intercultural trainers, teachers, professors, we need to mix up a little bit the theme we use in our intercultural courses. Not just talk about culture like migration or minority, but also about women's status, religion, and maybe class privileges and privileges in general. That's because these are the differences that disturb them the most, and that they probably do not get any training at all on this subject either. And this data and reflection leads us to one question that I will leave you with: how to use former experiences in intercultural training. As we see, there is a lot of different kind of significant intercultural experiences they already had. They already had before they go into courses, before they go into their last internship, before they became professionals. So how can we use these as trainers, as teachers, as professors, to make them better professionals in intercultural settings? That's really a question. I'd like some kind of answer. So thank you very much to have listened to this talk, and I'll be glad to discuss with you in July online. Thank you very much. Bye.